disable medications if you
Okay, hang on
drink
two
it.
seconds. Apparently we weren't live before, but I've been recording it, so
Oh,
we're
here
gonna,
we are.
there we
I,
are.
I see it now streaming live on Facebook.
Oh my God. I
Well, it's
don't,
only,
I
we're
want
only 5 minutes
to live.
after the hour, so we don't have
Say
too
that
much to
again?
take it from the top.
Take it from the top. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Take it from the top again. Oh my goodness. So we are live on Facebook, I think somewhere. Um, and okay, so we're live. Tracy Stuckworth with Thrive Meetings and Events, and this is Camper English, and he is a cocktail and spirits educator and expert and journalist. And he was just explaining to us before we officially went live, apparently, because I thought I was live a few minutes ago, that he started his Cocktail Safe website based on new infusions that bartenders were doing. Is that right? So,
Yep.
okay, let's restart that. Yes.
Sure. So bartenders were using some sort of wild out there ingredients, such as tobacco infusions and tobaccos and
Okay.
bitters. Then there were also, we looked to old recipes for a lot of information about cocktails, because it turns out the classic cocktails are classics for a reason. But some of the bitters and herbal liqueurs and things that date back a few hundred years have ingredients that have since been proven to be unsafe. So that was something that I wanted to let people know about as well, as along with a lot of ingredients are illegal that are called for in these old recipes for safety reasons.
Okay.
And then but you can just go on Amazon and buy any herb you want, and the labeling is not so good. So there wasn't a centralized place for bartenders to go to find all this information on the safety of different ingredients in cocktails. And so I started with a grant from the Tales of the Cocktail Foundation, which Tales of the Cocktail puts on the biggest cocktail convention for bartenders every year in New Orleans. They had a new grant program, and I applied for and was given a grant to build a website. So I went into the idea of safety in cocktails with looking at like ingredients that could be dangerous to everybody. But along the way would pop up occasionally ingredients that are not good for some people, such as allergens, but also like grapefruit, which interacts with a lot of pharmaceuticals, and then vegetarian and vegan and religious objection, dietary restrictions. So I also saw a lot of bars starting to do better labeling on their cocktail menus, saying, might contains nuts or allergy aware in on the labeling. And so though Cocktail Safe is really, it's mostly focused on those ingredients that are dangerous for everybody, there's a little bit of allergen information there. And then I started developing talks about it. So I first presented a talk on allergies and cocktail menu labeling at the Tales of the Cocktail Convention about a year ago. And then a version of that is what you saw on the United States Bartenders Guild live webinar that I did a bit. So although I do need to build out Cocktail Safe with a little bit better allergen information, so far my education on allergens and cocktail labeling is geared towards the bartender audience rather than consumers. I haven't been trying to run around saying like, everybody, like, watch out, there are almonds in gin, which there are. And
well, that was what surprised me at your in the Bartenders Guild thing, that there were almonds in gin. I mean, is that standard?
It's in so many of the most popular gins that, yeah, it's common. And
what is the almond used for?
The almonds used for flavoring, essentially, with the other botanicals. And some of the botanicals used in gin are sort of there to be a binder for other botanicals to help them stick out. So some are more background flavors. Like we don't taste almond notes in any gin that I can think of.
Right.
And if we look on sort of not vetted allergen websites, when people find this out about gin, they're like,
Uh-huh.
oh no, gin contains nuts. It's going to kill us all. And at least as of 2007, according to a study in the UK, there had been no cases of anaphylactic shock from nuts in gin. Now that's
Okay.
a little bit old information, but there have been nuts in gin for centuries, and no one was the wiser. So uh, that was helpful to learn about distillation and how allergens pass over, or in the case of allergens, they
Right.
don't. So it's similar with gluten as to almonds and other allergens. If they're
Right.
distilled, we have a lot less to worry about.
Right, because when you talked about, when you're talking about gluten free as well, they're saying that the liquors are distilled so much that you can't, it should not impact somebody that has celiac disease or what. But I remember when um I found out I was allergic to yeast, and so I went from drinking Bud Light and beer to drinking Kettle One and Goose, and then now then Tito's, and then now nothing. I don't drink anymore. But the Goose and the Kettle One, I could feel in my sinuses. But then when I switched to Tito's, because it's made with corn, it was fine. I didn't have that impact. So I think it affects people in different ways, definitely, for sure. But the one thing that I heard the other day, okay, so we're talking about, I know that was cocktails, and I want to talk a little bit about wine for a minute because of filtration, wines that are filtered. And I know that filtration systems are changing a little bit, but they use egg whites and they use fish skins, and what's that word that is in that
It is in glass, I think.
yes, in glass, to filter wines. And so so it makes it non-vegan. And where I check that out is on barnivore.com.
Right.
But so can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, as you're about to find out, it's not limited to wine.
Okay. All right. Good to
So,
know.
yeah, so fining agents are clarifying the wine. So instead of wine looking cloudy like it has particulates in it, it's see-through and shiny, no matter what color it is.
Okay.
And these often not vegetarian fining agents are used. So Guinness only became vegan in the last decade.
Yep, I
Guinness
saw that.
was always not vegetarian, and they switched their fining agents in order to be vegan compatible. And that's the case with a lot of wines and beers, and these things don't need to be declared on labeling, at least not in the United States, at least not yet. Similar, if we think about the base of vermouth is also wine, so that may be clarified at that stage. And then anything that has botanicals added to it post distillation. So that's could be vermouth, it could be Italian bitter liqueurs such as Campari and Fernet Branca, things like that. They could be fined with animal products, and we just don't know for most of them whether they are or not. That's going to be the case with all alcohol, all distilled alcohol, that we don't know the ingredients in general because they don't have to be labeled, and that's becoming, I think, increasingly problematic and maybe short-lived. I don't know. We have a long tradition of not listing ingredients on alcohol products.
And so, so for people to know, the FDA regulates the food, what needs to be labeled on nutrition labels on boxes of food. And who does that for the wines and products like that? Is that the same thing?
It's the TTB, Federal Tracks and Trade Bureau. It used to be the ATF, I believe,
Okay.
alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, but it's now TTB is
Okay.
what it's called. So they have there are the FDA rules for food, and then it's almost like a subset of rules for beer, wine, and spirits. There are ingredients that are only allowed in beverages in alcoholic beverages specifically, and not allowed in food, which is a really,
Okay,
there's
that's
a
odd.
really unique set of ingredients. There's one like paragraph in the TTB law where it's just a list of strange ingredients, but upon closer inspection, they all seem to be in the formulas of bitter liqueurs, chartreuse and Fernet and Campari and things like that. Almost like they ask everybody, all right, tell us what's in your stuff. And you don't have to list it on the label, but we know it's been in the country for 100 years already. So we'll just put those as we know they're safe in this one paragraph. And so you can't eat it, but you can drink it for a lot of these ingredients. So it's a unique subset of rules when it comes to beverages.
Well, and that reminds me, I went to Terra Madre Salon del Gusto. It's a humongous food and beverage festival in Italy every year, put on by Slow Foods. And there was a session on wooding, and it was about cocktails and creating cocktails by going to do foraging in the woods and bringing those herbs and flavors into your cocktails. And again, they were saying, don't go do that because unless you're an expert on what you're picking, because you don't know if it's poisonous or how it will react. So you need to make sure that you're an expert in that before you do that. But they weren't labeling it. And in the EU, allergens are required to be labeled on unpackaged foods, but it doesn't require it on alcohols and things as well. But I think I mentioned or commented when you were on the webinar for the Bartenders Guild, is that there was a woman in the UK who had a drink that had a raw egg in it, and she was allergic to eggs, and it wasn't disclosed, and she was sent to the hospital for that. And then the restaurant owner, he was labeling his menu, but he wasn't labeling the bar menu, and he immediately went and changed that because of the incident that he experienced, his customer experienced. So that is challenging. I mean,
it is. There are the known ingredients that we use in cocktails.
Right.
They would have known about the egg, because that was probably an egg white shaken in a drink to make it nice and frothy.
Okay.
You would use for a whiskey sour or a pisco sour would often have egg white in it, rather than just the fining agent eggs, which are filtered out. So it's extremely uncommon for people with allergies to eggs to have a reaction to fine products. At least as far as I'm aware. You're much more in tune with the food allergen world, whereas I've sort of come from the top down world of like looking at the science, and we know that people are more sensitive than machines when it comes to allergens. So the eggs use in cocktails, that's typically something that would happen as it's being prepared. And if a bar wanted to make a drink frothy, but didn't want to like scare customers away by having an egg in the drink, because it sounds gross the first time you hear of the concept of like you crack an egg and it's just there to make the drink frothy. It reminds me
of some movie. Who's the guy in the movie that was drinking raw eggs to become bigger?
Rocky.
Rocky. Okay.
Yeah, it's not like that. These eggs are there really just as a texturizer to make things foamy and frothy, and it doesn't add any flavor to the drink unless you're doing an eggnog or something like that, where you have the white involved as well. But those are the sort of ingredients that, well, probably should be labeled on the menu for the cocktail menu. If you just had whiskey sour and no ingredients, then a person might not know if there was going to be an egg in that drink or not. And then there are a lot of other ingredients which are kind of hidden in jargon that we use in the cocktail world that people might not know about. And that's what I've really been trying to educate bartenders, that if there are sort of hidden ingredients that are known to be problematic for some people, then we should do a better job of calling them out. We find a lot in tiki drinks because a lot of tiki drinks use a syrup called falernum and another syrup called orgeat. And these both have almonds in them. But if you were to just use typical tiki notation, Mai Tai has orgeat in it, and that's what it is. And but if we were to label that properly for allergen awareness, we want to put an asterisk. It contains
Right.
almonds in it. Similarly, falernum, and then a lot of tiki drinks have grapefruit in them as well,
Okay.
which we try to be aware of for impacting medications that many people take.
That's
So,
more than a Bay Breeze, is that right? Is it Bay Breeze?
yeah, that sounds right. And the Greyhound is
Right. Yep.
vodka with grapefruit. And then it's used, so a lot of tiki bars, it's a blend of different citrus juices in specific drinks. So some will just use a shorthand and just say citrus or blend of citrus because
Gotcha.
it's used all over the menu, and it's orange, lime, grapefruit, for every, it makes a really long description on a cocktail. So we understand that there are a lot of shorthands used in labeling drinks, but I think we need to do a better job of knowing which ingredients are problematic to call out specifically. So grapefruit would be one, and the almonds in any almond syrup would be another that are particularly important.
Now, so you've been doing classes at Tales of the Cocktail and the Bartenders Guild. Are you getting a lot of attendance at those sessions, and do you see more bartenders paying attention to this?
So far, yeah, I think that there's an interest, and it comes along with the renewed interest to safety in general in the cocktail world. And it's still kind of early on because the problem, as we've discussed, is that we can know what we're putting in a drink from the bottles on the shelves, but ultimately we don't know what's in the bottles on the shelf. Chartreuse liqueur, for example, is recipe dating back to the 1600s, and it reportedly has 130 different ingredients in it. The only thing that we know for sure, based on its legal category, is that it has alcohol of some sort. We don't know distilled from what, and that it has a sweetener of some sort because it's a liqueur. So that doesn't tell us if it's honey. That doesn't tell us if it's white sugar. It doesn't tell us the base of the spirit. And then it certainly doesn't tell us the other 128 ingredients that may be distilled, they may be infused in it. So there are a lot of potentials for problems. Now, most commercial products on the shelves have been vetted essentially by being on the shelves for a long time. And if there were really problematic ingredients in them, they would be better have attention called to them.
Right.
It's mostly when bartenders are making their own versions of these at home that they might not be aware of the legal and safety measures because you're just following a recipe from the 1800s and using calamus, which is illegal in the United States as a potential carcinogen, or making a homemade amaretto. So that's cyanide that we're putting into the equation.
Wow.
If we're using apricot pits or actual bitter almonds, then that could be a problem. So there's increased attention to that, which I think is sort of spilling over into the allergy space. But it's pretty new in the cocktail world to have a focus on it. Luckily, the people of Europe have legally mandated labeling. And on the cocktail menus, I believe the rule is that it doesn't need to be explicit on each drink's description, but that information needs to be available if you ask for it.
Right.
You have to have a document or at least the knowledge of if it has these 13 or 14 allergens that must be labeled on all products in the EU.
Right.
So it includes the top ones that we know here in the States, plus a few extras like I believe mustard and celeriac.
Yep. And sesame and
that bean powder.
Lupine.
Lupine, yes.
Yep, for lupin, yeah. And then they break out crustaceans and shellfish, crustaceans and mollusks separately. So I've taken the Serve Safe alcohol training and really mad at myself for not remembering, but I'm pretty sure that there's nothing about allergens in that conversation. Nope. I haven't taken tips. It's on my list to take. Is there anything about that, or is it more just about knowing when to cut somebody off?
It's really about liability. So it's about cutting people
But
off.
killing somebody with the food the drink that you serve them could be a liability issue.
Right, absolutely. I
Yeah.
had one bartender I was talking to who has their company had some of the best allergy labeling,
Uh-huh.
and I asked, how are you so good? He's like, well, once you see a person in your restaurant go into anaphylactic shock, you have concerns going forward and to want to be better at labeling things. So that company had made it their kind of mission to always be good. And by studying their menus, I came to really understand what they label and how they label, and for efficiency without clogging up the menu with 100
Right.
different warnings there. It's sort of unexpected ingredients in drinks
That's
that
a good way
might
to
have
do
an
that. Yeah.
allergen. That's what they were doing. So there was a drink that had rum that was infused with Ritz crackers. And so that they say, Ritz infused rum, et cetera, on the menu, but then with the little asterisks on the bottom, contains gluten, because you wouldn't expect to have gluten in a rum drink.
Right. Exactly.
Cocktail. We would in a beer. So beer is not labeled contains gluten,
Right.
but a cocktail that has sort of secret or unexpected gluten, they would label. And I thought that was a really wise way of doing things.
I think so too, because that is definitely not something that you would expect, especially Ritz crackers. So how, I mean, as all food allergic people should do, is they should ask the questions, hey, is there anything in this? But I mean, oh my goodness, now I'm going to forget his name, but he's out of Philadelphia, and he's an expert like you. We're both connected on LinkedIn with him. But we did a webinar together last week. Oh my God, I forgot his name. But he was talking about wheat glue that is used on barrels to hold, and actually my friend, Joe brought it up to me a couple of months ago too, that somebody that was in one of his wine classes said, oh, do you know if it contains gluten because of the way it's processed? And so that was a new one to him. So is that really a thing?
Well, wheat paste is sometimes used just to temporarily seal barrels. It's not,
Okay.
and we're talking like less than a piece of gum. It's
Okay.
like this spread out through to hold two staves together, or at the top of the barrel to hold it in place while they're building it. So it's not very much. However, some people are extremely sensitive in barrels. So I don't know that paste is used in every sort of barrels, because wine barrels are a bit different than whiskey barrels, for example. But I've seen it used in barrels for whiskey. So
Okay.
there's a fair chance that can be the case.
Okay.
And I don't know how sensitive people are to that or not. That's the part where I don't know as far as the consumer experience of that. But that's one example where allergens don't travel over for properly controlled distillation. So that's gluten, that's nuts, anything that's distilled. The allergens are protein, which are heavy molecules left behind in the distillation process.
Okay.
However, you can add stuff post-distillation. So
Right.
the wheat in the barrel is a post-distillation issue. If you were making a liqueur and you had honey that's no longer vegan. It's not an allergen, right, but for most people. But anything you add after distillation, which is approved in most spirits categories, to have a little bit of something, even vodka, that could, for some people, be problematic. It's not typically a huge problem, but when I teach about allergies in products, the bartenders tend to say, oh, there's no way that you can have a gluten reaction to any distilled product. That's wrong and ridiculous. Well, it's actually possible and conceivable. So let's give people a break. Like, right. You're not dumb and wrong for having a concern about something that you're allergic to. So I think that what I try to tell bartenders is, let's treat everything as serious, even if it sounds a little wacky. That if someone like in the States, we're not used to people being allergic to celery, for example.
Right.
And
Right.
celery bitters are used in some cocktails, and maybe those wouldn't be labeled on the menu because that's
Right.
not a common allergy to be aware of. But so to a bartender, like, is there any celery in here? Like, I'm extremely allergic to celery. The
Right.
bartender might be like, I'm not worried about you.
Right.
And if they didn't treat it seriously, could potentially dose somebody with something with a small amount.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. And talking to I'm going to say the good chefs are like, we have to treat if it's a dislike or whatever as serious as somebody, it could kill them. And I think bartenders need to do the same thing.
I
Okay,
agree.
to wrap up, we're in the middle of COVID-19 in this whole thing, and there's beverages to go. And I saw this morning, I think it's Illinois governor is going to make them legal. So it would be really actually behoove bartenders now to even put the labeling on those labels to go, for that. But what do you see the future of the beverage world at events? And actually you had a story that you were going to tell me about an event that you were trying to label. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think this is a sort of a good relevant case, and that I do a lot of bartending at tech company events.
Okay.
And I try to be good about labeling as far as if it has nuts or grapefruit in it, that those are always specifically called out.
Okay.
However, they had enforced for this last large event that the labels look like the food labels. So on the buffet, which those are going out of existence, but they had so it has to say, name of dish, ingredients, and then contains, might be gluten or contain or vegetarian or whatever on the bottom. And it was instantly this problem in that I was using Lillet Rosé, which is a fortified wine with various botanicals in it that are not disclosed. So I can say that this has Lillet in it, Lillet Rosé, and it has a grapefruit liqueur added to it, but I don't know what's in those ingredients. Their compromise was that the bottles would be available to show if needed, which still wouldn't get you any information if you had an extreme allergy to that. So it's an interesting case where we ran right up against the hidden ingredients in cocktails. But I think it's good, and it's sort of the new normal, I hope, going forward for doing cocktails at events, is that the labeling should be required to be as good as we can get it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because when we talk about food, I'm like, I don't want your recipe. I just want you to tell me if this ingredient is in here. I don't want your secret sauce and all of that stuff. I just want to know, is this going to kill me? Right. And maybe, yeah. So, okay. So what really quickly, because we're running short of time. One, future of food and future of beverages after COVID?
Wow. I think the future of the bar experience is going to be the largest impact. Some states are doing cocktails to go, as you pointed out, which would allow people to take, rather than sitting in a bar 6 feet apart from the next person, to be able to at least take home a cocktail from that bar and enjoy it at home while missing the communality of the bar experience.
Right.
And that's gonna be the thing that I already miss the most, more so than the delicious cocktails by my favorite bar, is just going to those bars and the great hospitality and people there. So I don't know when the end of that is. It's gonna be interesting and kind of rough for a while. You're no longer just sitting next to a stranger at a bar and like having conversation because you 6 feet apart from the next person. Like, hey, what are you drinking? That looks good.
Everybody's got their arms spread out, so my fingers can touch you and that's it.
Right. But you shouldn't.
Right, exactly. Because you just touched your face with your fingers.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, well, so again, everybody, this is Camper English. He is a cocktail and spirits educator, expert, journalist. You can find him at cocktailsafe.org, right?
Yep.
And then Alcademics, spell it for us.
Just like academics, but put an L in there. Alcademics for alcohol.
Okay. All right. Awesome. And then the new one. What's the new
New
one?
one is cocktailgreen.org, which has information about sustainability, also geared towards bartenders.
Okay. So we need to come back and have another conversation on that.
Okay.
I really would love to learn more about that as well, because I'm very much about sustainability and in our industry as well. So thank you so much for your time and your education. And I am sure that we could talk for hours on this, and I definitely want to talk for hours on this. But if you want Camper to, reach out to him to have him come speak at any one of your events and or be your bartender, right?
Absolutely.
When we go back to meeting and having events. Exactly.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. This is Tracy Stuckrath with Thrive Meetings and Events. This is my weekly Ask Tracy session where I interview individuals and experts on safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences. See you next Wednesday. Thanks.